Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest Linda-Carroll, and she's here today to share with us her new book, Love Skills: The Keys to Unlocking Lasting, Wholehearted Love. Now, Linda is a writer, therapist, seminar leader, keynote speaker, and private coach to couples, individuals, and families. She lives in Oregon with her husband and their Jack Russell Terrier. So let's welcome to the show, Linda-Carroll.
Hi, Marianne. I'm so glad to be on today.
You know, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your new book. And especially, my gosh, today's Valentine's Day. Couldn't think of a better time than now to talk about love skills.
I think that's absolutely true.
Yeah, so why don't you share with us, what was the inspiration behind writing this book?
Well, many years ago when I was training to be a therapist, I had an aha moment, which has really been the moment that was responsible for both of my books, Love Cycles and Love Skills. I was working with a couple in an agency, and I was teaching at the local university a class in interpersonal communication. And in that class, we did something called pillow talk in the class at the university, where I was teaching debate, and I had people, as part of becoming good at debate, where they would sit on a pillow opposite their partner and talk about their point of view about something, and then they'd switch, and they'd have to tell the same issue. They'd have to talk about the same issue from the opposite point of view, from their partner's point of view, as though they believed it. And one day I was sitting with a couple that had come in for therapy, and they were arguing about money. And they were really going at it. And I had the first insight, which was they don't need therapy. They need skills. And that's when I began to think about love is a feeling, and a relationship, a good long-term wholehearted relationship, is a set of skills that we learn and practice. So that was almost 40 years ago. But from that became a real impetus for me to train in lots of programs with the people I found I thought were doing the best classes, who had the best cachet of skills, and then eventually teaching my own course. And out of that came Love Cycles. And then out of Love Cycles, because people kept saying, how do we do this? How do we get to wholehearted? And because I've been teaching a class for 25 years, I decided to do a workbook and to put some of the things that I use in the class in the workbook. So that's a short story, a very short story.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us because, gosh, this book touches on so much and really brings to light a lot of issues that, as you were talking, that relationships have. And so when we look at love skills, you mentioned cycles. Why don't you share with us what those are?
Well, the cycles are 5 cycles, and they're based on lots and lots of things, not just my experience for 40 years working with couples, but they're based on nature. They're based on the development of the infant to the adult. They're based on literature and poetry and the different ways we talk about love. Very briefly, we start with the merge, and not everybody has the merge, but in our culture, that's where love starts. And we have songs and movies all about falling in love, seeing the one across the crowded room. I know that this is the person. And that is mediated by chemicals and brain changes. And there's so much about why we love who we love. I won't go into that now, but we're starting to really understand how we select people. And in that first stage, we see the best of the other person. We are enchanted. And it's as though we miss a lot of the cues that are going to be trouble later on, because we're all trouble, right? And the best part of what we fall in love with also has a flip side. But in that merge, all we see is what's right. And then what happens is the chemicals start to wear off, and we go back to our normal way of being. We also go back to the ways that we're different, because in that first stage, we see all the ways we're the same. The second stage, we see how we're different. And some of those differences begin to bother us, and we move into what's called the power struggle, very similar to the power struggle we experience at 2 and at 14, where we're breaking away from the idea that we're part of another person. We want to be our own person. And things that seemed so easy to work out in the beginning begin to struggle. That's normal. One of the problems is we don't know it's normal, and people think something's wrong, but it's not. We're just finding our way back to ourself, which is the second part. A good relationship rests on being able to be whole within ourselves and connected to another person. So stage 1, we're in the connection. Stage 2, we come back and find, oh, here I am. I got lost in this, and here I am. But the power struggle, because most of us never got taught the skills for how to manage it, it can get really, really tough. One of the things that I say in Love Skills, and I say it in a lot of my blogs too, is that for most people, the trouble that they're talking about, the power struggle to get a dog or not a dog, where to live, to have a child, who does the housework, power struggles about sex, that the issue is not really the problem most of the time. The issue is what happens when we each take sides and we stop listening to our partner and we break that sweet connection. And suddenly we're looking at the other person. We're each fighting to win, and we have lost our best friend. We've lost our connection with the person we love most. And then when that happens, all kinds of other things happen. We get defensive, we move into fight or freeze or flight, we withdraw, we do some really hard moves. And that moves into the stage of disillusionment, disenchantment, which is the third stage where we're stuck in the power struggles. People often think that those power struggles are the relationship. And just like in the beginning, when everything was perfect, in the third stage, we see the evidence that everything is wrong. And that's where people often come into counseling or coaching or want to take a class. And what I say to them is that I don't know if the relationship is going to work or it isn't going to work. I don't feel like that's my business really, but I do know the skills that can help you see how you got here. And often people who want out of the relationship really want out of the power struggle. And when they get out of the power struggle, they find each other again. So the fourth stage is deciding what to do. Do you do the work? Do you learn the love skills? Or do you split without doing the work? Or do you stay in the relationship and just become more and more defended and separated from your partner? And so we have to make some decision about what to do when we're in that ongoing pain over and over. And for me, because I'm a coach and a therapist and a teacher, I get to see people who decide they're going to do the work. And whatever the outcome is of the relationship, the work will lead us to our own wholeheartedness. And this fifth stage is called wholehearted love, because it's out of the wholeness of ourself that we learn to love, not out of the emptiness of the self or wanting someone else to fill us. So there's a whole lot of skills that I teach in wholeheartedness, which are different than the earlier skills. So those are the 5 stages.
I so appreciate you going over those, and I know that's just a nutshell kind of version of those, because everyone, when they dive into your book, there's so much more that you elaborate on those stages. And I think most people will go, well, why can't I just stay in stage number 1 forever and, always be in this like lovey-dovey kind of, feeling?
The first reason is that it's mediated by hormones and chemicals. We have brain changes when we fall in love. But secondly, if you just look at the seasons of in nature, or the waves of an ocean, the way they build and break and then crash and they start again, is that we are a part of cycles. Every person, every part of this world is a part of cycles, and love is a part of cycles. And just think about your own feelings. You don't go into a wonderful time of life and stay at that peak. Something happens and down you go again. And so we have rolling hills in our life. For some of us, peaks and valleys that we travel on, but we don't just stay in one place. And so some of those, if you think about 2 people together, traveling together, there's 2 different kinds of rolling hills. We're going up in our life, and then suddenly we're in a job we wanted, and then we're thinking, what am I doing here? Why didn't I do something else? I always wanted to be an artist. It's just part of life that we don't stay consistent in a particular mood, or space. You put two people together and you have those changes going on with both. And then you have the third dynamic of the relationship, which is also going through its own stages. Sometimes we want to be really close with each other. Sometimes we want to be apart and feel our own self. And sometimes one person wants closeness and the other wants distance. And how we navigate those changes is a part of what I think gives us strength. So if we were just on top of the mountain all the time, feeling lovey-dovey, we would never develop ourselves into wholeness. It would just be a free ride. So I think for myself, my relationship of many decades really is my most spiritual path, is just learning how to get back to wholehearted over and over again every time we fall off.
I think one of the things that people really get confused with, they think they get into relationships and then they're in that lovey-dovey stage and they're like, this is work when that ends. They're like, gosh, I've really got to work at this.
Yeah, and it's free. The first one is free. I mean, we call it falling in love. I did it at 11. And that's how I start my book. My book is very self-disclosive. My husband said, you're very unplugged in this book. And it's true, because I also talk about he and I a lot. But I fell in love at 11 years old. And I had no idea what it was. And I was a little Catholic schoolgirl without a clue about what this thing that was about to happen was. And when it happened, it just knocked me. And I realize now I got the biggest chemical hit when I met this boy. And it became a theme for my life to try to understand what happened to me in that moment and that relationship. Now, it was a experience that I think led me to write both of these books and to try to figure out what happened.
Well, I'm so glad that it did, because it's really interesting when we look at just relationships in general, and going back again to the work that it is. What happens if we get to a point where we're just constantly annoyed with our partners? Is it like just time to call it quits then and say, forget it, this isn't working out?
No, it's time to understand what's going on. There's a lot of reasons why we get annoyed. And one of the things that I write a lot of blogs. And one of the things I've done is I've read a lot of blogs. And I am amazed at how many of them talk about normal stages of relationships as a reason to call it quits. I mean, I think I get annoyed a lot with my husband because I'm pretty critical. And that's the thing. I used to think it was him because he didn't pick up his socks. But I have realized that really a lot of the annoyance comes from my own impatience and my own perfectionism. And I think annoyance is a different experience than it is to feel violated by somebody else. So there's a lot of different things that go on in a relationship. And I remember that we would have this ongoing issue where he would go out. He's a gardener, and he would do beautiful things in the yard all day. And I'd walk out. He'd say, "Come see what I've done." And I'd walk out in the backyard to see what he had done. And there was this beautiful yard with all of, vegetables and flowers and fruit trees all pruned. And guess what I saw? I saw the hose that wasn't put away. That's all I could see was the hose or the spade. I mean, that was really about the work I had to do to not be so critical. So a lot of annoyance comes from ourselves. A lot comes from one of the things I talk about in the book is the difference between walking issues that really are deal breakers and annoyances when it's really a reflection of our own inability to put up with living with another person. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I appreciate you going into that, because I think a lot of times, we get past the stage one and we're just like, okay, it's real now. We're living together, or we're in this relationship and moving forward. And then it's like, how do you determine if there are there indicators that this person will be good to move forward with, or signs that say, hey, you know what, you need to kind of think about this a little bit more?
Yes. And in the book, I talk about this. I talk about the love cycles, and I talk about what signs to watch out at each cycle and what things that you need to do that are counterintuitive. So in the first stage, which is the selection process, especially with your history, some people have a history of not selecting well. And that's a whole, and I won't get into that. That's all in the book. But when you're in that stage, you need objective information that has nothing to do with how you feel. And I actually wrote a blog that was very popular called Don't Trust Your Feelings, because we're always taught, what do you feel? You feel, is this the one? And, some of us, the one, that notion of the one, that we're going to fall in love with the most inappropriate person over and over because we're programmed to. And someone to save, someone to fix. And so we need objective information. And that objective information doesn't have to do with how we feel. It has to do with, what are their relationships with other people? How do they talk about past relationships? How do they treat animals? How together are they in their life, in their dreams? And here's a big one. What happens when they don't get their own way? Can they take part of the responsibility for themselves, or do they blame other people? So those are things that don't have to do with feelings. They have to do with noticing, in spite of the feelings. You could be madly in love with someone who's so narcissistic and they cannot claim any responsibility for anything that they do that is part of a problem. That's a person you need to walk away from, because that's going to come out in the relationship. So some of the qualities that we need for a long-term relationship are often not the sexiest.
Mm-hmm. I can really see that. And those are kind of some things. I'm so glad you have those tips, because that would be really tough to live with long term.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, and I know in your book you talk about, like, you've got these magical words that we can say to our partner, and I love for you to share those.
Well, okay. So one of the words I talk about, I have a whole lot about communication. 3 magic words. Is that what you're talking about? The 3 magic words?
Yes, the 3 magic words.
Okay. I love the 3 magic words. The 3 magic words are, tell me more. So this is how it works. So your partner comes in and you say, how was your day? And they say, oh, I can't stand the person I work with. And usually what we will do is say, well, I told you that she was a jerk, or or maybe you should try going out to lunch with her, or I had a boss like that once. And so what we do, if you think about this, like you're throwing a ball to someone and you throw the ball and say, how was your day? And they throw it back and say, I'm really upset with the person I work with. And then we take the ball often and run. But with the 3 magic words, we say, tell me more about that. And what that does is it lets it be about them. We don't make a story up about what they mean. And it really allows our partner to deepen what their experience was about that. And they may come up with something very, very different than we would ever imagine was really going on. And now that's the first stage. The sort of the black belt of the 3 magic words is when your partner says, I'm really upset with what you said at the dinner party Friday night. And rather than defend, to be able to say, tell me more about that. What happened for you when I said that? Now that's hard to get to, but we start with saying, tell me more about your trouble with the person you work with, or tell me more about why you liked that movie. We went to a movie last week and I walked out of it in love with the movie. My husband walked out of it and he said, that was the dumbest movie I ever saw. And I felt angry at him. I mean, it's totally irrational, but I thought, how can he not like the movie? He's wrong. But I didn't do that. I said, tell me about why you didn't like it. And that was counterintuitive. And I use that word a lot in my book. It was counterintuitive because I wanted to correct his experience and explain why he was wrong not to like the movie. But actually, he came up with some really interesting ideas about why he didn't like the movie that I never would have thought of, that had to do with the aesthetics of it. I was into the story. So tell me more lets us also go back to that early stage where we listened all the time. And it requires us to listen and to understand, you know what, you're not me and I'm not you. And that's a big thing to get in our relationships, which is we're not the same. Who are you? And if we can ask that question through the whole relationship, it brings us to a richness of curiosity and safety and friendship that we wouldn't get to otherwise. We keep rediscovering each other.
That's so important. It allows other people to have their own views and to really kind of dive into their perspective on things so we get a broader perspective.
Yes, that's right.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Well, and, it's interesting. I know a lot of times people put a lot of importance on sex in a relationship. How important is that?
That's a very tricky question, Marianne. For some people are not very sexual, and they're with somebody is not very sexual, and I think that they're often tormented by the real trouble is when you have desire discrepancy. So you have, and different stages, there's different levels of desire. So I don't think there's a blanket answer. I think that the answer is not how much sex should you have or how important is sex. I think the answer is, how open are you to talking about it? How open are you to navigating those differences when one person is full of desire and the other person isn't? One of the interesting statistics I read, I don't know how reliable it is, but it certainly fits in with my experience as a couples coach, is that for a lot of couples, sex stops not because of the woman, but because of the man. Isn't that interesting? And even though we think of men as having higher libido a lot of the time, that often, because I think that men are not used to talking with other men about their sexuality, and so they don't know what's normal. And with women, we've talked about it since we went to the well, to get, and because of all the stages women go through in their own cycles of life, that it's easier for women to talk about it and laugh about it and to roll their eyes about it and say, oh my God, I can't think of sex, or all I think of is sex. But most men are not walking around the golf course saying, how are you doing, Fred? And Fred says, well, I couldn't get it up last night. That doesn't happen often. And so normal changes that we all go through in our sexuality, and this isn't true, of course, for all men all the time, but for a lot of men, what happens that is normal, which means trouble with erection or premature ejaculation, that those normal experiences feel abnormal. And so the research makes sense to me in terms of what I've seen, that rather than talk about it, they cut off sex. So the answer to the question is, how important is sex? Is I put a different question in there, which is, it's really important to have an ongoing dialogue about how you're each feeling sexually. Is it okay that we're not having sex very much? Is one of us unhappy with it? And if so, how do we deal with it? Or if one person wants sex a lot more than the other person?
Yeah, those are things to really have an open discussion about, because everyone's at different places in their life at different times,
That's right. That's right.
Mm. Well, I know you also discuss the Enneagram in your book. Why was it important to include that?
What we talked about earlier, that really core issue with couples is, you're not me. It is such an important thing, and it works in all kinds of ways. We were talking about sexually. You're not me sexually. You like different touch, different things turn you on, and we do for our partner what we want done for us. And in all kinds of ways, in terms of what we give them as gifts, how we touch them, how we talk to them, because we think they're us. And the Enneagram is the most the easiest, although it's a very complex 2,000-year-old system, it's also easy to grasp. And I think that it was one of the great liberations in my own relationship. And I've passed that on to couples and in my classes, in my book, because it's a way of understanding differences without making someone wrong. It is, oh, that's you. So it really was great for my partner and I, because he's a one. He's predictable. I fell in love with his predictability. If he says 3:00, it's 3:00. He has it, and he keeps to the plan. He wants things to be done right. He's highly ethical. All those things I thought were wonderful. And then I remember one day we were going somewhere and I'd wanted to change plans on the way, and he wouldn't change plans. And I said to him, "You're so rigid." Suddenly that same quality, predictability, doing the things as he said, suddenly there was the flip side. Whereas on my particular style on the Enneagram, I'm spontaneous. And he loved that in the beginning. And when we moved into the power struggle, he began to call it, "You're so impulsive." Well, the Enneagram takes us out of that judgment about each other. It helps me understand that for him, if he answered the phone when we used to have a house phone, and I would say I'm not here, he couldn't do it. He just was unable to say she's not here. I could rationalize it. I'm not really here psychically. I'm not here emotionally. He could not say she's not here if I was there. But now that I understand him on the Enneagram, I get why that was so hard for him, and he gets why it was so easy for me. So it's a way we can increase our generosity with our partners and the differences between us. And I think the Enneagram is the easiest to understand of all of the personality tests.
That is so hysterical that he couldn't even say it.
He's a one. He's a one. Ones always tell the truth, no matter what.
Well, and and having that information just really is so helpful in a relationship. Because then with that, and then also when we understand, the love cycles, I mean, it just makes all this comes together. It makes sense.
Because when we fall in love, one of the things we fall in love with is the way our partner sees us and the way we see them. And then what happens is we begin to criticize. We begin to feel their criticism and hear our own criticism. And that brings most of us back to being kids. And then we go into protections. And when we start to recognize you're not me, another great example is when he's sick. When he's sick, he wants a glass of orange juice and the shades lowered and me to leave him alone. And when I'm sick, I want a lot of pity. I want a lot of attention. I want a lot of reassurance. And so what would happen? I'd get sick. He'd say, here's a bowl of soup. Bye. And I'd feel abandoned. Or he would get sick and I'd say, oh, sweetie, it's okay. Do you want another pillow? And he would just say, get her out of here. So in understanding you're not me, it really changes. One of the biggest messes I ever saw with a couple that had a pretty good relationship was when the woman turned 50. She was a highly sensitive person. She was off the scale in introversion, and her husband gave her a surprise party and invited 300 people. And she burst into tears and ran down the street. And it took them months to clean that up because he was looking at her thinking she's me. Who wouldn't want a surprise party? Well, I'll tell you who wouldn't want one is a very introverted person. So that's why that's so important to understand the differences without judging them.
Yeah, that really is because, you're right. While we might enjoy something, we really have to shift perspectives on what our partner or spouse is looking for in a relationship, so they feel supported and loved.
Yes, that's right. And seen for who they are, not who we think, not who we are, or not who we want them to be.
Gosh, I'm sure it's really easy to do that. That's why this book is so important.
Well, thank you.
Yes. Well, what final thoughts would you like to leave our listeners with today?
I think that I'd say two things. One is that the when we talk about this being work, is learning these things. It really is not just with our primary relationship. When people take my classes or do the love skills work, they find that all their relationships get better. This isn't just about being with a partner. It really is their life skills for relationships. And the second thing is that if you have a partner who's resistant to this and doesn't like the idea of a workbook or a class or listening to a pod, it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong. You can do the work, and often making the changes in yourself can create a whole lot of difference in the relationship. So it's important. I have a whole thing about that in the book. If you have a partner who doesn't want to do it, don't make this a power struggle. It's okay. That's one of those differences. Some people show up in very different ways. Rather than sitting down and talking about feelings, they just might be the most generous person you've ever met in your life, but that's not how they do it. So I would just put that in, that people can have a lot of arguments go on about how people think that the other person should love them. And one of those is learning, quote, communication skills. Some people want to run as fast as they can just when they hear that word. So if you are interested in this, get the book for yourself and read it first. And I talk a lot more about that in there. But one of the things that I think we all need to learn to do is see what the gifts are that our partner brings, not the ones we think they should bring.
Yeah, leave room for them to be their authentic self in a relationship. Well, Linda, I know your book Love Skills was just released today. Congratulations. Where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about love skills?
Well, I have an online course that they can take a lot. There's variations of that class. I'm at linda-carroll.com, and I have an Instagram account, Linda Carroll Official. Isn't that a funny word, Linda Carroll Official? But they can go to my website at linda-carroll.com and find out all the things that I do.
Well, Linda, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Well, you're welcome. It's great to talk to you, Marianne. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you, Linda. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and, of course, to talk about your new book, Love Skills. Love Skills is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just what moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Friday and Saturday at 5 p.m. Pacific and 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.